Okay, let's get the show on the road. Clickety clack, clickety clack. One of these days we'll have sound, but I still got to worry about my memory. And you get to hear typewriter clickities and a little opening logo and tortuganwordpress.com and his little belt buckle steampunkish motif, because I had written that steampunk novel. Everybody had better have tortuganwordpress.com in their little network there, because otherwise you can't draw on my material if you don't pay attention to it. So here we are in the next show, and there I'm stopping sharing, and let me close off some junk here and say hi to Cap and Jackson, who are going to be the willing victims on today's show. And it's part one is continuing the delightful saga of Flores Man, the little Hobbit of Indonesia. And then part two is going to be on Florida creationism. And so also, both of you keep kind of an eye on the live chat there to see what kind of little stuff is going on there, because if anything pops up that I may have missed, you want to call it to attention, either comments or interesting subject matter, or they're starting to wander because I'm wandering and therefore they're starting to talk about something completely different. As you are aware, the last many weeks, I have been examining the Contested Bones book by Christopher Rupe and John Sanford, a creationist work that was sent to me by a normal person who was flabbergasted that this stuff was being spewed out and didn't want to have the trouble of going through it all himself, and said, hey, would you want to take care of this? And I go, sure. So he sent the book to me free, and I have been proceeding showing the source methods approach as to how we deal with all of this stuff. And the problem is that our dear pals at our dear authors here are behaving in a typical manner, which is they have a dogma that's got to be true. There's human beings that were a specially created kind in Eden. And then there were these not humans that can't be humans. So Australopithecines and so forth must not be. But everything else is just weirdly deformed, strange humans that are maybe due to the fall or something or other. So Homo erectus and Neanderthal are all just odd humans in their taxa scheme. And likewise, Homo floresiensis, the little bitty hobbit, are just strange microcephalic pygmy forms that do that. And that's the dogma that they proceed. The problem is, as I've been taking note of, is that they're stepping around data right and left on the physical anatomy, the way the skulls are formed, the shape of the brain, the details of all of that, that show that they're interesting, and in many respects they're developing things that are consistent with natural evolution, but they're not humans. They're not humans yet. They're not all the way there. They're not within the range of actual humans. And Rupe is, who's the main point person in cherry picking the sources, only pays attention to material that reinforces what he wants to be true. So I put up a bunch of links to a variety of papers. The one lead paper is Deanne Falk's paper from 2005, which is on a brain endocast, where they did a virtual brain endocast of the innards of the skull, where they're able to tell brains rub up against the skull and they create distinctive little bulges and stuff. And so you can find what's going on, even though the brain isn't preserved. Its interactions with the skull allows you to see what sections are convoluted and what isn't. And so that's how the tools have grown much more sophisticated over the years. Her paper, they cited just that, and just on basics, the size of the brain. The main conclusions that Homo floresiensis was actually either its own species or a variety of Homo erectus, they just bypassed that part. And indeed, they had a thing where Falk went on to write a book, which they authority quoted. Fortunately, I was able to find the original material online at Amazon, and I hand copied out all the stuff. But they quoted a thing that it was clear to us, this is Falk writing, it was clear to us that the wide temporal lobes of Hobbit were a feature that was evolutionarily advanced toward the human condition, which was unexpected, even unprecedented in such a small brain. That was their little authority quote. But the problem is that toward a human condition, not that it had got to one. And so, this is something that makes sense from an evolutionary point of view. In some ways, it was more sophisticated than Homo erectus, and because it was so tiny, the whole issue is how much convolutions of the brain and things are involved. By the way, they went into considerable detail about what the temporal lobe does, and Rupe and Sanford didn't much. They're very cherry picky about what they refer to it. Fortunately, the other paper that Falk did in 2009, based on still more information, that Rupe somehow or other never managed to spot because he never cites it anywhere. It goes into a lot of this information, and an awful lot of the stuff is stuff that eventually ended up in her book. So you can get caught up to speed on that little puppy. There was also a lot of back and forth criticism in Science Magazine to the 2005 paper, and so you can see the back and forth going. There were 2 different critiques and then 2 different responses, and I put links up to all of those. So everybody can play on the playing field and find out what all the information is involved on that. The upshot is that when you look at the specifics, it was indefensible to argue that Homo floresiensis was a pygmy, or based on the brain data, or a microcephalic human being, or indeed anything in our species at all. It was a separate species that is a close cousin to Homo erectus. That has been Falk's position all the way down the line. Nothing about the data supports an identification of it with Homo sapiens as a subgroup. And just to be sure, I emailed her to make sure. And she replied very, very lickety-split just last night, saying, yep, that's her position. There it is. And she also wished me luck to continue jousting with creationists on behalf of the data. So that's exactly what we're doing. So C. Brown, I know you've been watching my videos. He's a young Earth creationist who makes comments every once in a while on the ones in this series. Be it known that I check with the original author, and she concurs with my characterization that Rupe and Sanford are misrepresenting her work and missing the data on this. Ha ha. So what we've got then is a continuing pattern of behavior. Oh, jump right in there. Yeah, well, you have to say something,
I just have a question that I've been thinking of, and it's just trying to figure out how they're trying to classify like Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, and all these other different species of the Homo category as human, as a Homo sapien.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't they? I mean, that's correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that it almost just comes across to me is like try to make a chimp, take a chimp and a human, look at the skull features, and claim they're the same species because they're about as similar.
Yeah, and that's the whole point about all the details. Some of the what's been so fascinating about the Hobbit is that it's got some interesting variations on the erectus model, and in some respects is retaining very primitive characteristics that are more like that of Homo habilis, and that going back even earlier. So the idea is, what it's suggesting is that there is a population lineage going on as ancestral to this that we don't know anything about because we just don't have any data. They haven't shown up anywhere else on the scope. Not that little itty bitty humans or proto-humans would be easy to spot in the fossil record, especially if they lived in an environment where it's very, very difficult for that stuff to be preserved. And I think the last week or the week before, there was some stuff, there was some really neat articles, I think by Chris Stringer was one that was particularly useful that I called attention to, because it had maps of the region, and you could see what the sea level was at the time. That although there's some evidence that they would have had to have crossed a bit of water, it's not a huge swath of water. So the possibility that these ancestors of the hobbits, yep, jump in.
They would have just used floating environments.
Yeah,
or
logs,
maybe
all
by
sorts
volcano.
of possibilities.
They could have gone by volcano, don't you know?
Yeah, there are tsunamis in the area. It's a geologically, as we well know, catastrophic thing, and we know how people have been swept out to sea and all the rest. So it need not have necessarily have been intentional.
RJ, I mean, like you know, from the works that people have done on, or the creationists have done on Noah's Ark, where some animals got different places by the floating environments.
Oh yeah, well that's
as
Todd Wood and Kurt Wise, that they have these whole ecosystems. They get way worse than strays. They're talking whole ecosystems, vast vegetation mats with forests and stuff on them. I mean, it's that bad. But what actually I'm talking about is that we do know from the various tsunamis that have occurred just how much distance can be covered on things and how things can then be caught up in currents. And when you look at the distance across the zone where the Flores Island was in relation to that large archipelago that was now at that time connected by land all the way up into Southeast Asia when the sea levels were lower, that it wouldn't have necessarily involved an enormous amount of distance. We're talking some miles, but not 50, 60 miles, which is the boundary layer that affects for Australia, where there's no doubt in modern paleontology and anthropology that the ancestors of the humans that arrived in Australia did it by boat of some kind, canoe or somewhere, because they had to cross at even the minimum like 40 miles. So that's beyond the horizon. So that means there's a certain amount of wanderlust, there's a certain amount of well, let's see what's over the horizon kind of thing. And there's no reason necessarily to think that the hobbits may not have fallen into some really fascinating character states if we could have a chance to see them living and put them under the MRI, but we can't do that. So we have to kind of draw off of the information that is available on here. It was pointed out earlier, Animal Man and others noted about that they would have met Komodo dragons, stegodons, giant storks. Yeah, they've got the physical critters and stuff that were around in there. And so there's a bit of a debate that's starting to wane now. The idea that some of the things that led to them being small might have been that they were dwarf species on an isolated environment. But the developmental material that they've been able to peek up suggests that that probably isn't really much of a factor. And again, it's all discussed in a great deal of detail on all these little back and forths on the stuff. The upshot is that as puzzling as they are, the current view has trended towards that they are in fact a cousin to and a separate species from the Homo erectus population. And therefore we got this still fascinating biogeographical phenomenon of how did they end up here and what are they connected to and what populations are going back and forth on things. When you're looking that deep, paleogenomics can't help you as much as it's been doing now with Neanderthal, where you can literally have their DNA to look at. So you can start seeing which genes are flipping and what elements are producing the things. And eventually they're going to be working out exactly the things that produce their non-chin and their specific morphology. That'll be in the next decades of that.
So you mean to tell me that people actually believe in using the scientific method and evidence to prove their points and don't just rely on some book written thousands of years ago?
It's a shocker, yeah.
I'm amazed that people actually want evidence.
You know, RJ, you mentioned we were talking about the stegodons in the comments. That's actually one place paleogenomics has been used to figure out where they fit in the elephant tree.
Yeah. Yeah, there you've got enough of blips on the scope. See, one of the things that hampers humans is that we took over and we became the species and drove all the others, or the others went extinct to where, 20,000 years ago, you still had various remnant populations, but basically we became the human species. And that put a big crimp on a lot of the model because they tended to think of it as a conveyor belt of progress where everything else is just leading to us. And we didn't realize, it was much richer than that. But with elephants, you do have groups in India and Africa. You've got multiple species there. And then you have mastodons and others where they're recent enough that you can start picking up the DNA on those as well. And yeah, you can play around because the cladistics, they can just come in and then start looking at the character states, and you have more fossil data and all of that. So it's a really remarkably rich bunch.
Yeah, that's the thing I never got with creationists is they want to, deny genetics when it disproves what they don't want to be true, what they want to be true. And from there, then they try and turn around and use it to say, haha, see, as we talked about elephants, so I'll just reference this again. See, elephants and pine trees can't produce an offspring, so ha, therefore evolution false.
Right. It's kind of, it seems like they just ignore it like completely. If for instance you read Georgia Purdam's work, because she is an actual geneticist, you read what she says about genetics, it's like she just flat out says, nope, these things don't exist. And people are like, wait, but these things, nope,
Jackson,
they don't exist.
Jackson, it doesn't seem like she's ignoring it. She's ignoring it.
Yeah,
That's
or
true.
one that I got into it with someone, and I had also mentioned this on a video I watched. Someone did a response to, and the person who they were responding to, and who I was also got in an argument with, is they tried to argue the chromosome number, and I really wanted to get them on this, and they would not answer me because they said humans have a set number of chromosomes that doesn't change. So I asked them, are Down syndrome peoples not human then? Because Down syndromes have 47 chromosomes, while a normal regular human would have 46. So by
Yeah,
their
there's a
definition of
lot of
chromosome,
dynamics going on. In
they
fact, so
can't.
there's
Yeah,
quite a technical literature on the various species and groups that we can see in living organisms have a variety of that. And of course, plants go
yeah,
hog wild on their
oh,
chromosome numbers. They
God,
double
yeah,
stuff up and that like nobody's
yeah,
business. But we vertebrates are duller, but not completely dull.
yeah,
And
and
the chromosome fusion, for example, is one that would have occurred way back,
yeah.
probably long before our
That's
species developed. And
that's
if we had the
exactly,
DNA of an erectus to look at,
yeah.
the odds are that they would have had that fusion already.
That's what they were arguing against, was like, well, see, you know, people, try to claim that we had this fuse, but humans still only have a set number of chromosomes. You can't get around that. And so I asked him, I said, so you believe the humans are determined by chromosome number? And he goes, yeah, they are. I go, so people with Down syndrome are not human then? What? No, they are. I go,
Yeah, and
no.
even one argument, Casey Luskin, when he was pushing this kind of argument, he kind of independently. Jeffrey Tompkins does his branch over in the young Earth creationist side. Casey Luskin was pushing the other direction, where he was kind of arguing that chromosome fusions are impossible because they could never find. You would have to have two chromosome fusions conveniently happening in the same population so that they could breed and produce a new population. No, actually, you can spread back and forth, and depending on the circumstances, you can breed with
Yeah,
somebody that has a different number of chromosomes because of the way the genetic combinations work, and gradually it can spread through a
Right.
population and fission off.
exactly.
So
Right.
it's
Yeah,
They
much
have
more
the
complicated.
they have the trope that chromosomal fusion makes you infertile when actually studies have shown no, it doesn't. It can decrease
yeah,
fertility, but it does not by any stretch make you sterile.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
One nice thing about researching all of this stuff in order to combat creationists is you find out so much about biology you didn't know before.
What are you
Oh,
talking about, RJ?
I've learned so much just from you guys alone. I, it's like, wow, I've learned so much, and just not only with you guys, but also having to look stuff up against creationists.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
and I'm doing the same thing. Jackson just had a discussion with a creationist where, for some reason, he decided to bring up, well, where's the adaptive evolution of shame? And you and Peter were a little bit flummoxed on that. Well, while he was dithering back and forth, I did some text search and source searching and that, and found a couple technical papers
Yeah.
on PNAS and put links up to them because they were both open access paper. One on MRIs on this from 2014. So clearly, there is actually an adaptive evolutionary side to how shame functions, and there's a neurobiology behind it as well. So now I know a little more about the subject, and everybody that watches the video and stuff can
yeah,
find the links, and then we'll put Glenn even farther behind the curve.
Well, I mean, yeah, I was much. I mean, if he had said, there's no adaptive explanation for altruism, which is what they usually go for, because they've never read any works on evolutionary altruism, then I would have been prepared for that. But he went with shame, and I've never heard anyone bring up
Yeah, it's a
the
niche
adaptive function
thing.
of shame. I was
yeah,
like,
And
okay.
but I was intrigued by it as well because I did some searching on the thing, and although there is a huge technical literature, I keep track of it in TIP on the altruism thing. The shame part, as it turns out, is just now starting to be analyzed. The MRI papers from
yeah,
2014, and that's a preliminary study, and the one in PNAS on that we're comparing cross-cultural elements of shame to see some of the adaptive features and why there were common threads to them. That was from 2016. So obviously they're just getting around to it because
yeah,
evolution wants to accommodate all the data, and nothing will escape their maw eventually.
yeah, yeah. I have one person who is trying to argue that, oh, we were all, it's a Muslim, It's not Harwin Yaya. It's another channel on YouTube that I found. But they have a video where they try to argue that, well, science can't create a spider web, so therefore Allah.
Okay.
It's like they try to point to all these things that science or modern technology hasn't been able to make.
That's gee whiz. Oh, look at how incredible this is. This is fabulous. This is just complicated. I bump into a few Muslim apologists. They fall into a variety of camps. A lot of them will channel intelligent design material, and Harun Yahya does that a lot. And others are kind of smorgasborders, the lower echelon ones, so they're picking up all sorts of stuff from all over the place. And it's particularly ironic because I think any intelligent design advocate who are really unlikely to be Muslims, they are going to be conservative, politically conservative Christians, should be rather disconcerted by the ease with which a Muslim apologists are able to siphon off their arguments and jettison the religion part there. That's, they should really watch out what's arguments they try to make here.
Yeah. Yeah, like they try to make an argument of like a butterfly or something, and I might need to talk to you later with that sometime, Jackson, whenever you get a chance. But yeah, it's they have like a whole bunch of really just like, oh god, you're making my brain hurt, and it's yeah, so I'm gonna have fun with them.
I'm older, so my brain doesn't hurt as easily. Go ahead, Jackson.
There was a paper I read fairly recently, I think, that said the lepidopterans might be pushed back into the Triassic. I think the earliest previously they'd been thought to originate from was the Jurassic, but there might be some evidence of like some wing scales from pre-Jurassic.
You're talking butterflies and stuff here, right?
He did say butterflies.
Yeah, they're hard to get.
It was a monarch.
Most of those flying insects are known just by their wings. That's what tends to get preserved. You can imagine some going floop, floop, floop. But the fossil record's extremely sparse on it, so you always have this taffy pull. If you think about it biologically, the genetic switches that are eventually leading to a new morphology have got to predate the morphology, because they're going to be starting their little modifications long before it reaches the stage where it looks really different. And so any attempt to date divergence times based on the genetics is always going to date earlier than the overt physical changes.
That's actually what we brought up in Cambrian Explosion Part 1, how the Hox genes long predate the animal phyla.
Now, and we see this in feathers and scale, feathers and hair. These are delicious examples. If you were going to look and see the deep roots of the genetic systems that are eventually going to produce hair in the synapsid line and feathers in the diapsid line, the very earliest stages are involving deep core genes, and so you're looking at a time that's 50 or 100 million years before feathers and hair. And you're also seeing things that they would be almost indistinguishable. You would have to have microscopes and genetic data. That would be the example of a reptile-y looking thing where the skin has a tendency to do this versus that, invagination versus invagination, and it's that subtle a difference. Now, follow the tracks down the road over the course of 50, 100 million years. Now you can see that buckling in, buckling out in the bone morphological genes and the sonic hedgehogs and all the rest and keratin forms are now producing feathers and hair. And we can even track the proto-developments of the feather side of things with actual preserved fossils. But anybody who thinks, any creationist that tries to tell you, well, where did all these genes come from? Well, they didn't happen all at once, I can tell you that.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've got another creationist to get mad at me one time is they brought up about, well, how did some, single cell amoeba produce, all the genes of today, Can you explain that one? I go, well, there is an amoeba out there that has the largest genome. So technically, if you really want to go based on size, it has enough information.
Well, the size isn't the matter. It's the content. Yeah. And it is still some legitimate. A clade starfish says, don't some of the HOX genes map all the way back to bilateria? Yeah. And it's precisely because it's that bilaterian side-to-side aspect and top-down and front-back that's at the core of what HOX genes do. And likewise, the parahox over in the other corner.
Yeah.
It would be swell if we could get in the old time machine and jump back a billion years and take samplings of critters and look at their genes to figure out what the hell's going on as to where they originated from and what circumstances are. But as it is, we've all got to look at it. It's like you were trying to figure out what is going on in New York City by standing on a really high ladder in San Francisco and taking your binoculars out and trying to infer what's going on, because all you have is the stuff that you can see at your feet. And those are long trails that go all the way back into another time frame there. So it's all paleogenomic retroengineering. And the farther back and deeper you go, the trickier it is. The one that I mentioned in one of the earlier shows before I got off on the Sanford obsession was the Ediacara biota and the issue of whether or not they had HOX genes or not. And it's still an uncertain question. We don't have any living ones to look at. They're all extinct. Jackson is going to be discussing them in his, as discussed them in his Cambrian videos. And they're structured so differently than what we see HOX genes doing in either plants or in animals and their counterparts on that you've got puzzlements going on here as to what is going on amongst a structure of the Ediacara thing. And if they can work out, and there are some trying to work out, can they generate an Ediacara-like form by tweaking the HOX genes and combining them and duplicating and varying them? And theoretically, they may be able to work that out. Jump in there, Jackson.
Unless they're convergently multicellular protists, which would suck.
Exactly.
That would really suck.
Or they could be a form of animal life that doesn't use HOX genes, which would be astonishing. And and that's why they look so different. So this is really a very interesting developmental biology program, and that's one of the reasons why developmental biologists that are interested in that period are delving in little bit by little bit to ponder them, because it's like when you look at any organism, let's look at us. We got our little jaw here, and we got our cheekbone, and we got skin, and we got all this stuff. We got tetrapod with pentadactyl limbs, and all of that stuff. Every single one of those is the way it is because of all the genes and the gene regulations and the mutations that generate them. And so any organism that you see has a genome. They have genes governing all the pieces, and if you could see their development, that's one of the reasons why Evo-Devo, developmental biology, from an evolutionary point of view, is so interesting, because in order for an organism to turn into this shape, it had to start out as just a single cell and then duplicate and split and then diversify and gastrulate and all that. Every single one of those steps has to follow a rigorous and precise natural process. And in order for it to have evolved, there must have been changes that will be consistent within that framework. And the fact that the Ediacara biota are all things that may or may not be animals that you don't have any living example to test with makes it really hard to kind of figure it out. But boy, scientists are curious, and they ain't going to give up. They're going to work on it. And as paleogenomics advances, they'll think even more about it.
RJ, these things were just buried in the flood, clearly.
Yeah. That somebody was saying that on Twitter, where they were criticizing a creationist, and they were saying, that the creationists think that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. And I go, they think everything coexisted.
Right.
It's not just dinosaurs. It's trilobites and dimetrodons and mastodons. All of them existed simultaneously. Yeah. So when you see anything in the fossil record, these little palm frond ediacarans and trilobites and anomalocarids with their weird little shrimp mouths and all that, they're simultaneous with Homo erectus and Flores man
and whales and everything else,
and whales and plesiosaurs and tyrannosaurs and Archaeopteryx, and they're all mushed together in a giant simultaneity.
All foraminifera and diatom species.
Bingo. And boy, it's gonna be tough to make that. I'd use the analogy sometime back, and I use it in I think Dynamania chapter. Everybody read that. About Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street in New York City. And according to normal history, it has a history that originally there was, eventually there was a pair of Astor mansions at 42nd Street. And then one of the relatives died, and his kid couldn't stand his Aunt Carolyn next door. So he tore his house down and built a hotel there, the Waldorf. And Carolyn Astor stuck it out for years before she finally got fed up, and she tore her mansion down, built a new mansion uptown, higher up on Fifth Avenue, and built a hotel next door to this, where they decided there would be temporarily the single hotel. They had doorways in between them, and they were going to name it the Waldorf Schermerhorn for her side of the family, but they talked her out of that one, and they called it the Astoria instead. So that's where the Waldorf hyphen Astoria comes from, and that stayed the way all the way down to the 1930s, when or 20s, when they decided to tear the hotel down and build what eventually became the Empire State Building on that site. So anyone who goes to the Empire State Building is seeing the place where the old Waldorf Astoria used to be, and before that, the Astor Mansions on Fifth Avenue. Now, if that took a long time from there all the way into the 20th century, if you're trying to argue all that happened at once, you get into trouble. So I painted the picture of Mrs. Astor trying to hold a ball with her 400 in her house at the same time that all these damn people are coming through to register at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And then they are all shocked when they hear this terrible rumble as the B-24 slams into the Empire State Building up on the 80th floor in 1945, raining debris and engine parts down on the avenue outside, scaring all the horses. No, these things didn't happen all at once.
Well, RJ, when they're missing 90% of the data field, it's very easy for them to cram all of these things together.
Exactly. That's why map of time questions are so important. Animal asked me, was there snow for the polar animals in the Garden of Eden, or was that part of the fall? There again, now they have creationists have a double bottleneck to bother with. It's everybody thinks about the flood part, that all the animals on the ark were preserved and only those become the seed of everything that happens. So all the existing species on Earth have to be descended from the animals on the ark. And how the hell did that happen so fast? But everybody forgets the first bottleneck. And I'm going to be calling attention to this more in future and eventually in some of the books in that. It's that every fossil must represent stuff that died in the flood. Therefore, they had already differentiated since creation only 1700 years earlier. So how many created kinds were there, and why are there so many Dimetrodons and Sphenacodonts and Mastodons, and all of which would have been in the fossil record? So they have a double bottleneck to contend with, and needless to say, we haven't seen a hell of a lot of things on that. We're about halfway through the show, so let me put up my obligatory pathetic desire for financing here.
Before you do that, I was just saying it looks like Beach had to go, so just
sorry, Beach. And there's hopefully everybody is seeing the RJ Tips patrons, and I will read them off. Stephen, who was in the feed just a bit ago, and Dyer, and Eat Meal, and Yui, and Mona, and Hendril, and Jen, and Jody, and Daniel, and Ralph, and Eric, and Benjamin Simpson, and Staggles, and Alex Stone, and Totus Real, and Everett, and Paul Williams. Thank you all for being Patreons. I will call attention to the Patreon site, which is still active, but biting my foot off here. I will point out they're really slow as molasses to get money to me. So please, if you really want to funnel stuff and help out in any way you can, the GoFundMe.com DCGo. I'm still looking for the $5 challenge to work, which is the idea that a whole bunch of people with thousands of people in their network, and there are those on Twitter and Facebook and stuff that have those, you know, if they all decided, heck, $5-10, you have something you could spare, just rush out and dump it on the site, and away we go on that, and say that you support Tip, and in effect buy me a cup of coffee on that. That has yet to happen, and I know you're out there, and I wish more of you could help. At the moment, I'm just scraping along. You've got the WordPress.com website. There's book length material there. There's links to this channel. There's links to Evolution Slam Dunk and my novel and various other ways. So There's my can rattle in the middle of the show here, and we will stop sharing that and shut that little puppy down. I am a Social Security guy who is technically doing this as my little after-hours retirement party hobby. I don't have a staff. I don't have enough scratch to pull together even necessarily to buy ink on a regular basis. So I'm doing stuff really, really on a threadbare budget. But as Jackson and others may be able to attest honestly, I'm kind of opening up a new area of research that nobody has done before at that source methods level, measuring what sources people use and how they are developed. And I contend it is the killer app that will shred and vaporize anti-evolutionists in a way nothing else will. Care to comment, either of you gentlemen, on that?
I agree.
Yeah.
I've read Evolution Slam Dunk, and it is great.
I've used it a couple times in my arguments. Just, yeah, like I said, it's been helpful for me. So I haven't read it.
I wrote it because nobody had done this before.
Yeah.
There was literally no accounting of the reptile mammal transition data as it related to how anti-evolutionists dealt with it. That the only brief mentions were some discussions that weren't even available much online about criticizing Dwayne Gish from the 1980s. And so I'm going, excuse me, but this is an issue way bigger than that. So I pulled together, from a tip methods point of view, everybody on this subject. So you literally know the field at a professional technical level. I know it reads like a science textbook at times, Cap, but couldn't avoid that because it needed to be passing muster for somebody from a college level. At the same time, I literally survey all anti-evolutionist arguments on the subject. So you are now up to speed on that. No, they can't surprise you.
I would say, it's, I mean, I would argue that, it would, I would love to see it used as maybe like a supplement material in like even high school biology classrooms, because it's written that even a high schooler, like maybe a junior in high school and up could easily read this, pick it up, and more or less understand it, because you break it down very well. And like I said, the only boring parts are when you quote technical papers.
Yeah, well, and like, those would be like sidebars in a future second edition, and we'd be reformatting. I'm still putting out my call. Literary agent, let me put that in there. Literary agent, or publisher. Anybody out there who knows people who knows people who knows people who knows people who would be a literary publisher on any science publication thing, or the publishers directly where they know somebody who works there and blah, who has an in, let them know that I've got a book out there that I would like to see, and Christine Janis, the paleontologist, would love to see too, a second edition where I get the pictures, where I can now get the rights to the illustrations to show everybody. Because she said that all that, to get a 5-star instead of a 4-star, that's all it needed, was to elevate up to that new level where it would now be a college level resource that would be technically accurate, illustrative, revealing, and kick butt for just rip snorting obliteration of anti-evolutionist positions.
Hey, Jack, I don't know if Jackson, because he has more access to these types of people than I do right now. Do you know if any of your professors might know someone that you can maybe put the feelers out for?
It's possible.
Yeah, any of them that have been published in regular journals, they may have a literary agent themselves, or they may have contacts at various publishers. Put out the feelers to say, hey, this twerp in Spokane has got a book here that kind of needs a regular publisher and a new edition. I'm ready to hit the ground running. I got a big box of material on that. I know almost all the illustrations I would be wanting to put in. I know exactly where they would be from, and it would be just a matter of getting the rights to them, so that now you would see what the fossil looked like. You would see what the developmental biology figures are from Alibardi, and you would see the stuff that the creationists had under their eyeballs, and you're going,
yeah, and I'll try and see if I can get anything out maybe next semester if I can make it to K-State then, because I plan on taking a biology class.
Somebody may know the old bit about 6 degrees of separation from what's his name, Kevin Bacon, that our networks are so broad in principle that somebody must know somebody.
Yeah.
So
And
please help.
and if need be, I know some people who are in I think one's in the chemistry, one's a chemistry major, and the other's a biology major up there, and I can try and get a hold of them, see if they if they know any of their professors or anything who might know someone. I'll try and put the feelers out for you too.
We're a little past the mark here, so now I definitely have to get to part 2, which is the latest skivvy on the creationist teaching crap in voucher schools in Florida at public expense. I gotta find my stupid screen share thing again. Boop, 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 and then we go into infinite regress, like Doctor Who. These are some of the images that I culled from the article that I put up in the link to, that gives you the whole thing. It's from the something or the Guardian Sentinel or something like that. Here is one of the ones from, there are 3 main creationist textbooks systems that get used by homeschoolers and others. So one is the ACE system, and the other is Bob Jones University, and the third one is Abeka.
ACE. I remember them, RJ.
Yes, they're wacky, aren't they?
They are awful. They are the worst.
Yeah, and so they not only went through and interviewed a lot of the people. 80% of the people who are getting vouchers in Florida are going to religious schools. And a huge chunk, probably 60% in some areas of Florida, are using creationists, one or more of these creationist books in their curriculum. This should scare the shit out of you. In 2018, this is happening. Now, here's a page from a high school biology workbook. Notice the dinosaurs, stegosaur and brontosaurus or apatosaurus, and the modern dressed kids wandering around. Apparently, this little kid here apparently is going to be hunting for behemoth, whose description fits the brachiosaur. No, it doesn't. Anyway, you'll notice that they are on a green field. Would this look to you like they're on a grassy field?
I would say it's supposed to be grass. Yeah.
Tiny problem. Grass and monocots did not evolve at that time, and therefore there was no grass. And over on the side here, possible human and dinosaur footprints at Paluxy River.
Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah. And you've got African bushmen seeing what appear to be dinosaurs, along with pictures of hippopotami. All of this is the claptrap stuff from the fringe of creationism. Even Institute for Creation Research, John Morris, rejects the Paluxy River tracks.
Yeah,
and yet this is showing up
what they
in
are.
a textbook that is being put out by ACE in this era and is being taught in 2018 to actual kids. This is absolutely unacceptable.
Oh my, yeah, because the Paluxy riverbed bull crap was another dinosaur track that got filled in before
they're basically, well, and you're looking at the heels when they put their heels down. They're plantigrade versus digitigrade, and even what's his name accepts all of that. Now this next one below, the providence of God. Had it not been for the defeat of the Armada, Spain might have kept control of the New World. North America might have become Roman Catholic, just as Central and South America are today. Instead, God provided North America as a place for the religion of the Protestant Reformation to flourish. This is from Bob Jones University.
That's very funny.
The Protestant Reformation was flourishing over in Europe, not here.
Yeah, this is part of the weirdness of it, because there's an anti-Catholic streak.
Yeah.
Bob Jones University. Now, the irony is that a huge chunk of the people in the voucher school system in Florida are Hispanics and Catholics. So there are going to be people who are having this material presented to them, disparaging their religion in a way that is unjustified even for an atheist to say.
I love the people who are anti-Catholic and claim Catholics aren't Christians and pull that kind of bullcrap here, because it's always funny, because if it wasn't for the Catholics, Christianity would be a minor religion. And so
let's not forget the Orthodox too. Yeah. Let's not forget the Byzantine Church.
Yeah,
but it's and then down below, we've got the third one here: God's plan for variety in nature. The truth is, many varieties of canines have developed from a single pair of canines that left the ark. The error is dogs, seals, raccoons, bears, cats, and hyenas supposedly evolved from a single weasel-like animal. And that's one of the Abeka series. Is steam about to come out of your ears, Jackson? You want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, if only we had fossils like Dormaliscion and the Miacids to justify that belief, and if only we
Yeah.
had genetics to show that all these guys are very similar to each other. Oh, if only.
Yeah,
But
if only we
alas,
had all
Yeah.
that developmental biology material. If only we had that vast array of science material that somehow or other Becca has managed not to notice.
yeah,
Yeah,
this
and
is just absolutely absurd. Well, dogs, seals, raccoons, bears, it's kind of small on my screen, but yeah, all of them are caniforms. And of course, you can find early seals, like I think in Arctos, that looks
Yeah,
like a
they
weasel,
got
not like a
a
seal.
surprisingly large amount of air quotes transitional forms
And then,
out there
yeah,
that we can see in the fossil
and
record. Is the
then,
I
paleontology is constantly advancing.
oh yeah,
yeah, and I would. Oh, go ahead, Jackson.
I was gonna say that, and then you've got a very slow and clear transition from the early dogs to early bears. You've got the
Yeah.
the amphicyonids and all those guys, and so uh, yeah, you have that, and then of course you have on the other side of that the feliforms. You've got hyenas, which are very dog-like cats, which
Yeah.
also there was a paper I sent you a while back that we read that was talking about the extremely gradual macroevolutionary transitions among hyenas, where it's so slow, it's hard to tell where
Yeah.
one species ends and another picks up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a question from Piggle Pig, Swill Bucket. I love that name. Jackson Wheat, what kind, in air quotes, is the red panda? Not clade, but kind.
Well, they'd probably toss it in with the raccoons and just say meh.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I seem to recall there has been a little bit of discussion on that in the creationist literature, and I don't have my bibliography up to see on it. Now, we know that, in fact, the big pandas are actually in the bear family,
They're
but
ursids,
the
yeah.
red pandas are, I think, raccoons. And
They branch off right before the procyonids.
yeah, anyway, they're sufficiently distinct groups that just convergently look kind of similar, which is another reason why more data has involved in clarifying stuff between cladism and the genetics and all the rest. But in terms of kind, yeah, the dog trope pops up so ubiquitously amongst anti-evolutionists, and you can see why, because it's the trope that's presented. They're just dogs, varieties of dogs, that's okay, they're all within the same kind, and then they don't pay attention to all the other data field. And we know from the baraminology stuff that Jackson and I have both looked at independently, the whole baraminology movement, which is the attempt to actually work out how many kinds there are, and it's only originated in like the last 20 years, they leave out a lot of data.
Yeah. And I was gonna say something on the photo that you showed with the dog, seal, cat, weasel, bear, whatever all was in there.
Man, bear, pig.
Yeah.
That's the man bear
No,
pig.
no, no, it's the happy demon pig. But when you were showing that, I was like, yeah, they're all freaking mammals as well as another one that we can classify as they're all eukaryotes. I mean, how specific do you want to get down on this level?
All you need to do, there are a lot of different videos that I've seen on the thing, but our Aaron Ra is just perfect. Anybody who wants to get a sense of the huge swath of biological data that we now have regarding fossil forms, just watch Aaron Ra's series. And just sit there and not even necessarily take notes, although I encourage you to do so.
Oh, yeah.
But nevertheless, just watch them over and over in any one of those groups, and you're suddenly going, oh, there's a lot that was going on in the past. And then if you want to argue that there are kinds involved, that all of this is taking place at the time of the flood, or if you're an old earth creationist intelligent designer, that somehow or other the creator is muddling along and tweaking something or other going on in there, by all means do so. But accommodate the data. You've got to explain the data. And I don't think they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just, I mean, I've sat there and took notes, and I think in one video, I think it was, or maybe I tweeted it to him, but I ended up putting in a technical paper somehow. I tried to get it, either was tweeted or or put in the comment, I don't remember which, on one thing he did of something I felt missed. I mean, I wasn't making a correction. It's just a really cool point I found that I was like, hey, I wish you would have talked about this a little more in there. I never heard back on it, but it was just something that, because I was taking notes on it. I was like, that's interesting. That's it. Okay, I'll look that up. And I found a paper that kind of talked a little more on something I wish he would have expanded on.
Well, in even somebody who keeps up with the literature as much as Aaron does, nobody is going to be able to get everything.
You can't.
I track over.
No.
Yeah, I track over 1,800 technical journals in my tip work, and I guarantee you, I can't monitor every bloody one of those. And so what I try to do is to keep track of the upper echelon things and counter stuff. Whenever I see a video, there's other little series they're put out by, I think, some British a zoology department in a thing, and they do really tiny little short videos. They're only about 10 minutes long, and they will take a particular subsection, so they're much more tightly packed than Aaron, who tends to step back and look at things from kind of a bigger taxonomical level. And I go through there and I will be putting down the taxa names because they're mentioning the latest stuff. And they don't give their technical citations. That's the one little complaint that I would have about it. But you can Google search the stuff and find out what the technical papers are. Not all the technical papers will have the name in the title. And that's why you have to be careful in looking out to find out where the things are, because it may be a new Aphrodisiac from the late Mesozoic of blah, blah, blah. And it's actually about that. So very rarely are taxa names mentioned in the titles.
Did you say an Aphrodisiac from the Mesozoic?
Yeah, wouldn't that be miraculous?
It's like, take a look at this helicopter from the Civil War.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's why another thing that you can do when you become really familiar with both the creationist literature and the regular technical stuff is you can spot when somebody doesn't know the field because they use terms they don't understand or use them in context. There's a creationist that routinely will muddle billions and zeros. So they'll talk about, well, this thing is supposedly 50 billion years old, and you're going, no. Nothing in the universe is 50 billion years old. I think you slipped another zero in there somewhere.
Oh, that's like Matt Powell thinks the Earth is 6.2 billion years old. I have no idea where the heck he got that number.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these are just muddling up on stuff, and we have enough ballpark things. The amazing thing about chronology is how relatively little adjustments have been made. When I was growing up in the ancient days of the 1950s, the world would have been thought to be about 3.5 billion years old. And they were just starting to discover radiometric dating at that point. And since then, they've gotten some improved techniques and some older rocks to look at, and it's been pushed back to about 4.5 billion for the formation of the Earth. And if you think about it, that's 1 billion years, but it's only a chunk. It's within an order of magnitude, way under an order of magnitude. An order of magnitude, it would be anywhere from 350 million to 35 billion. That's an order of magnitude either way, factor 10. And so you can see 4.5 billion is just a squish. It's well under an order of magnitude. When we look at closer to home, like the Cambrian explosion, there was a time when it was still thought to be about 500 million years ago. And then for a while, some of the earliest dating started pushing it back all the way to 600 million years ago, but then they started pulling it back again when they got ever more precise boundary markers as to what was actually Precambrian. And again, it depends on where you define drawing the line. And now it's about 540 million years. Well, that's only a few percentage points difference over that between what was known pre-radiometric dating. So everybody needs to kind of get that calibration scale in place. And this is particularly the case if you're dealing with people who are young Earth creationists that are going to be complaining about the dating structure. So anyway, we've got, what is going on? Jackson, I think, was probably devoured by lightning down there in Louisiana. And you have to skedaddle off too. You've got some stuff to deal with. So
I gotta, as long as I'm off by, in 30 minutes, I'm fine. I just when I set up for the interview I have coming up, so.
Yeah. So everybody, by the way, there's a portable map of time, a PDF that I generated for a flyer that we put out at a Darwin Day some years ago. And it has the history of the universe on a single sheet. And it's organized differently than the other approaches, where you've got the calendar approach, you've got the clock face approach, you've got the spiral. They're all different ways of illustrating the age of the Earth. And each one of them has problems from my point of view because of the scale, that when you want to get involved to think about, if you're focusing in on the recent past, as the spiral does, for example, you kind of have just a bunch of spirals going down the line that's actually covering all of what happened earlier. So you don't really have a visceral sense of what the physical length of that was, because it's a spiral. The calendar approach is you've got to home in on just one little day there, and you realize that there's more there, but now you lose the gradation on the recent stuff. So it all becomes like a blip. So I wanted basically nested hierarchies where there were 3 charts, and someday we'll maybe generate a 4th or 5th layer for like a t-shirt or something, because there'd be space enough on that. But the thing is, the first one is for the entire universe. And then you have color coding at one end, where now that pulls down to the next level, where that's the entire solar system history. And now you can see the same color is now out much more. Now you can start having a sense of how much the complex life part of the planet was versus the whole, and how much that was in relationship to the whole universe. And then the 3rd layer is now expanding that multicellular life period of about the last 800 million years out. At that resolution, you can start seeing mass extinction events and the arriving of mammals and reptiles and all that. And there's still a little blip on the end where human evolution has occurred. And theoretically, then each of those can be layered out, more layers, to get an even finer thing. But you still get to see the whole shebang in one fell swoop, and to get it to correct scale, so that you're not losing that what it means to have millions or billions, what the visceral sense of it. Scale, for me, is really important to get a sense about in time, to where you can see, if you realize that 2 animals in a fossil record, one dates 20 million years after the other, well, that's 20 million years. That's a huge volume of time, and there will have been time slices in there. And unless you're arguing that all the life vaporized and then a completely new kit was made just at the very day that critter died and got fossilized, that doesn't sound plausible. So there will have been things going on in between. What went on in between? And you'll find anti-evolutionists are really bad at kind of mentally filling in the in-between part, even within their own framework. Now, young Earth creationists have to take those things of where the 20 million years doesn't exist. Those both have to be contemporaries. They both died on the ark. They had to have come from a created kind. So now they have a different set of criteria that they need to account for, and they don't do that either. So all of that, any area, if you have a particular life form that you're fascinated with, read up on it, try to find out if it's got a fossil record. I'm a dinosaur groupie, so I'm interested in dinosaurs anyway, independent of the creation evolution issue. And so I have a good data field to draw off of. So if somebody wants to play the Dr. Dino trick with me, do so at your peril.
So you mean I shouldn't try to say that dinosaurs on Noah's Ark? Because
well,
remember,
if you do,
Noah
you better
took
figure
little
out how
babies.
many. Little tiny, yes. Well, yeah, Dwayne Gish in one of his books said that they brought the little baby of the sauropod kind, and they went into maybe a stupor of stasis for during the voyage. And I said, yes, a stupor, kind of like what Dwayne Gish's brain was into in writing such claptrap. No, this doesn't work at all. And it does a weird injustice if you're a religionist, because they seem to be very interested in the creation as an abstraction, but not as a real thing. Every one of these things would presumably be the handiwork of God by some means or other, whether evolutionary, theistic evolutionary, or direct creation. And so your job is to explain them. So if you think animals were specially created, what, a whole field of them, were they completely with their parasites intact and their ALUs in their genomes, like in art stuff and that, you got to think about that. And you need to come up with an explanation for it.
Yeah. Clay
Starfish says also the quote, how did we go from single to multicellular by accident, quote, only it took a few billion years. Multicellularity, I did an earlier video, by the way, on that, where I put up the thing that the multicellularity seems to be kind of intimately related to sex, or sex is intimately related to multicellularity. The processes of differentiation into multicellular functions is part and parcel with the way you reproduce and the way you can keep ahead of your parasites. And so there's a whole technical literature that they're just starting to explore now that we know more of a lot of the genes involved on that. And multicellularity actually is one of those things that pops up a lot. Conway Morse, who, by the way, is a Christian, a paleontologist, he would argue that multicellularity kind of is inevitable in a living system. And we can see so many different ways. The form we use is a different one than the way plants do it. And the form that plants do it are different the way than some fungi do it. And then some little protists that can have obligatory or facultative multicellularity and things. And it can be very interesting. And they're all convergent. They're not a single, there wasn't one multicellular and then everything else is descended from it. No, it pops up in multiple times. And this is taking place in the period from 2 billion years down to about 1 billion years old. And so the formal structures of the multicellular systems we can see now are probably in place by then. But other question is, what forms don't we even know about because they didn't get fossilized, or they look like somebody else's form in a very vague fossil context when you see something that's bacteria-ish. That seems to be multicellular, but maybe structured very, very differently if you could see the living organisms. Oh, yeah, Piggle just mentioned Volvox. Yeah, that's, I called attention to that because the Volvocines are knee-deep in the figuring out of how our version of multicellularity developed and cell adhesion systems and all that. And they have interesting forms of sexual reproduction, too, in there. So, and there was a bunch of technical papers on that. That I put in on that subject matter, because that is the rule that I go by, that if I'm going to bring up science topics, I'm going to have links there, open access all the time, so you can see them no matter, you don't have to pay behind a paywall or anything.
Yeah.
Because as somebody who's scratched for money, can rattle, please help tip. I can appreciate how other people, even if they have access to the internet, in our libraries here, they can come in and get on the internet for free, so they can get access to this information. You don't want to have something they're going to have to pay to see.
Yeah. But RJ, I got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you explain us coming from rocks if not divinely
Yes,
created?
or from slimy rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and that's the origins or bust argument. And I'll always tell people, I really hope more people make use of origins or bust as a trope, because everyone will remember me that way after I've turned into a pumpkin. But the idea is that it's what they're doing when they're bringing it up. They don't want to talk about the reptile mammal transition. They don't want to talk about myocytes and the origin of carnivores. They don't want to talk about ALU pseudogenes. They want to say, well, where did life come from? Or where did matter come from? Or where did come from? Or why are there laws and why in nature? Or why does mathematics work? Or why are we self-aware and can think about stuff? And it's all super duper fundamental issues that are unresolvable for the most part, because we can't get in a time machine to go back, or they're presuppositional, as in the whole why is there something rather than nothing stuff. Is nothing an option? That is presuppositional. And it's a way they use to bypass all the other information. I don't care how life originated. It could be a miracle, but I can see what happened to it after that. And it sure looks like evolution. And when we get way down the road to the reptile mammal transition, we've got predicted fossils. So it means that if a designer was doing it, they really love Robert Broom and Charles Darwin, because they're going out of their way to make stuff to make them happy. And I don't think that very plausible. There we go. Yeah. Well, we're past the hour, and this should probably cover it. We've, by all means, everybody make a point of reading that article in the Florida newspaper on that stuff. You can see the pictures and also the text and all the other stuff in there. And if it doesn't cause steam to come out of your ears, you're going, what? This is happening in 2018 at taxpayer expense? Say so. Brian, who couldn't stay in, he had to go off and do some stuff. He's from Florida. And so he'll, I'm sure, be taking a look at some of this stuff too. And it's an ongoing battle that we've all got to keep ongoing fight on. And I'm trying to do my part here in getting everybody onto a data field that is available to everybody, and to get, by example, show what it means to do source methods.
Did you
You're snarking at me?
No, something AJS said. Why do mathematics work? M13A1 T20 H8 13 plus 1 plus 20 plus 8 equals 42.
42
and everyone
is the
knows
answer,
42 is the answer.
Yeah, and mathematics is there are some branches of creationists. They are a minority, but there are some branches of creationists that hold that mathematics is a divine command, and therefore is the way it is only because God says so. So if God wanted 1 plus 1 to equal 5, then it would equal 5. And he just happened to settle on 1 plus 1 equals 2 because he felt like it. And you're going, don't let them do your bookkeeping.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, did you have any final comments or responses to what we've explored in this show since Jackson has had to skedaddle?
No, not really. Just, I can't, as you said, I can't believe in 2018 this is still going on right now as an argument. It's absolutely just shocking. But I do have one kind of smart-assy comment for you.
That's for you. Yeah.
Yeah. You said you turn into a pumpkin. Proof evolutionists believe humans turn into pumpkins.
Yeah. Apocolosyntosis, the gordization. That's an in joke about Nero. But
I thought that was Bippity Boppity Boo syndrome.
Yeah. But anyway, I can't say I'm surprised at what's going on in Florida. I'm appalled, as naturally would be the case, but it doesn't surprise me at all, because when you look at the politicization of the educational system, when you look at the culture camp conservatives that have been busy for decades, and they have their own in-house mythologies that they put forward, and they've got the clout to make it available. Oh, by the way, these Florida schools aren't subject to testing. Their curricula aren't, you don't have to make them public. They've had to do investigation on this. So they're basically loose cannons running all over the place. And theoretically, I suppose, somebody who thinks in ancient astronaut Eric von Däniken, or somebody that believes in some other weird cultic group, or Scientologists for that matter, theoretically could start up a charter school and get vouchers in their thing. And the state is so loose on criteria, you don't have to have any educational training. You can, a lot of these, they were talking about this ACE system, that it's so childishly simple that it's designed to run on autopilot. So you don't even need to be trained to be able to run these kind of school systems. And it's all very, very superficial. It doesn't teach kids to think. Well, I'm afraid you do need to teach kids how to think and let their imaginations flow and learn sound, rigorous method. And the real education stuff is doing that increasingly. And that's not what's happening with people who read that little kids were running around with their little swords going after Behemoth in the Garden of Eden. No, this is twaddle. Okay, well, thanks for showing up here for our show. And the fight goes on. If you can help me at tip, please do so. Get Evolution Slam Dunk. You won't regret it. Those of you who have read the book, please make a point of reviewing it. Tell other people about it. And anybody who knows that literary agent, get us in touch. Till next week.